Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Ezekiel Class. For those of you joining us at home, welcome. We're delighted to have you with us. We pray that this class will inspire you and lead you to a deeper understanding of all the details that God has put into the Bible for you. This morning we are in Ezekiel Class number 6, and we are studying chapters 8 and 9 of Ezekiel. And this is now the beginning of the second vision. And the organization of Ezekiel's 48 chapters long, but the organization of Ezekiel is that Ezekiel gets 13 different visions from God. And the first 7 chapters were the first vision. We've now completed that. We finished that last week. And today we are going to start the second vision that Ezekiel gets from God. This vision, by the way, occurs on, I guess I didn't write it down, it occurs on September 17th. In 592 BC. So that is the exact date. Ezekiel was a very precise guy, and God told him to be very precise. That was part of his ministry, was to be precise about things. So he recorded the dates, the exact dates of each one of these 13 visions. So we can go back today. He recorded it on the Jewish calendar, but we can go back today and take the Jewish calendar, convert it today, and go back and look at what the calendar looked like in those years and determine that this actually occurred, the second vision occurred on September 17th of 592 BC. That was how precise he was. 2,600 years ago, we know the exact date that he had this vision. So God gave him a vision. And remember, we talked during the first vision, God made him lay on his left side for 390 days to get him ready to become a prophet. God was testing him and preparing him with the discipline necessary to be a prophet. He made him lay on his left side for 390 days, and then he told him to flip over to his right side for 40 days. And that was so that he would bear an understanding of the kind of pain that God felt from the sins that Israel had committed during that period, or during the period before that. So this is actually, if you do the math from the day of the first vision to the day of this vision, it's actually, instead of 430 days, it's actually 407 days. So this is 23 days before the end of that last 40 days. In other words, he is now laying on his right side. But as we said, he's able to get up at times and do other things. And what we're going to see here today is he's actually going to be physically sitting in his house, and the elders of Israel are going to be arrayed in front of him. So physically he's there, but spiritually in the vision he's going to be in Jerusalem in Solomon's temple. So the vision is going to spiritually bring him to Solomon's temple, but physically his body is still over here in his own home, with the elders. So as you're going through this, understand that. Let me begin by reading the first chapter to you. That is chapter 8. I'm going to read that to you, and I'll read you chapter 9 later. This is in your notes, in the handout. Got to get my glasses on to read this. It's a little small. For those of you at home, please open your Bibles to Ezekiel chapter 8 and start reading along with me here. And you'll probably have a different translation than I do. In the 6th year, in the 6th month, on the 5th day, that is September 17th, 592 BC, while I was sitting in my house and the elders of Judah were sitting before me, the hand of the sovereign Lord came on me there. And I saw a figure like that of a man. From what appeared to be his waist down, he was like fire, and from there up his appearance was as bright as glowing metal. He stretched out what looked like a hand, and took me by the hair of my head. The Spirit lifted me up between heaven and earth, and in visions of God he took me to Jerusalem. Let's take him over here. To the entrance to the north gate of the inner court. That is right here, by the way. Well, I'm going to show you about Solomon's temple as we go through, but just as we're going through this, I'll show you where he's going. He's coming to this point right here. To the north gate of the inner court, where the idol that provokes to jealousy stood. That is this idol here, Asherah. Then he said to me, Son of man, look toward the north, this way, So I looked, and in the entrance north of the gate of the altar, I saw this idol of jealousy. So he sees this idol here that God is so jealous of, right here. And he said to me, Son of man, do you see what they are doing? The utterly detestable things the Israelites are doing here. Things that will drive me far from my sanctuary. But you will see things that are even more detestable. Then he brought me to the entrance to the court. That is here. I looked, and I saw a hole in the wall. That is here. He said to me, Son of man, now dig into the wall. So I dug into the wall and saw a doorway there. This is a doorway right here. And he said to me, Go in and see the wicked, detestable things that are going on, that they are doing here. So he goes in here now and he sees wicked, detestable things going on, worship things going on. So I went in and looked, and I saw portrayed all over the walls all kinds of crawling things and unclean animals and all the idols of Israel. In front of them stood 70 elders of Israel, and Jaazaniah, son of Shaphan, was standing among them. Each had a censer in his hand, and a fragrant cloud of incense was rising. So they're in here worshiping idols, right? Inside worshiping idols with censer, with incense and all that stuff. He said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of Israel are doing in the darkness, each at the shrine of his own idol? They say, the Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land. Again, he said, you will see them doing things that are even more detestable. Then he brought me to the entrance to the north gate of the house of the Lord. That would be back to here. And I saw women sitting there mourning the god Tammuz. That's over here. That was another altar to idols. This is in God's temple now in Jerusalem. There are altars to idols in here. He said to me, Do you see this, Son of man? You will see things that are even more detestable than this. He then brought me into the inner court of the house of the Lord. That would be right here. And there at the entrance to the temple, between the portico, this is the portico, and the altar, so he's right there. There at the entrance between the portico and the altar were about 25 men, right here, with their backs toward the temple. Not ever supposed to have your back toward God's temple. Their backs toward the temple, and their faces facing toward the east, toward Babylon. So they're facing that way. They were bowing down to the sun in the east. So they're bowing down to the sun over that direction. He said to me, Have you seen this, Son of man? Is it a trivial matter for the people of Judah to do the detestable things they are doing here? Must they also fill the land with violence and continually arouse my anger? Look at them putting the branch to their nose. Therefore I will deal with them in anger. I will not look on them with pity or spare them. Although they shout in my ears, I will not listen to them. I'm actually going to read chapter 9 to you here as well. Keep it consistent. Then I heard him call out in a loud voice, Bring near those who are appointed to execute judgment on the city, each with a weapon in his hand. And I saw 6 men coming from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north. So they're coming from here. Each with a deadly weapon in his hand. With them was a man clothed in fine linen who had a writing kit at his side. They came in and stood beside the bronze altar. I didn't have enough room to put them in here, but they're actually right in here. I put them out here. So you've got the one man and the other 6. They're actually right in here. Right beside, this is called the bronze altar. This is God's altar, by the way, in the temple. These are pagan altars up here. Now the glory of the God of Israel went up from above the cherubim. So the cherubim are back, right? Remember the cherubim from our earlier thing? went up from above the cherubim where it had been, and moved to the threshold of the temple. That's now here, the threshold of the temple. Then the Lord called to the man clothed in linen who had the writing kit at his side, and said to him, "Go throughout the city of Jerusalem and put a mark on the foreheads of those who grieve and lament over all the detestable things that are done in it." So now the man and his 6 associates are here, right where they are here. As I listened, he said to the others, "Follow him," the others would be the other 6. "Follow him throughout the city and kill, showing no pity or compassion. Without showing pity or compassion. Slaughter the old men, the young men, the women, the mothers, and children, but do not touch anyone who has the mark. Begin at my sanctuary." So they began with the old men who were in front of the temple. Here. Then he said to them, "Defile the temple and fill the courts with the slain. Go." They went out and began killing throughout the city. While they were killing and I was left alone, I fell face down, crying out, "Alas, sovereign Lord, are you going to destroy the entire remnant of Israel in this outpouring of your wrath on Jerusalem?" He answered me, "The sin of the people of Israel and Judah is exceedingly great. The land is full of bloodshed and the city is full of injustice. They say the Lord has forsaken the land. The Lord does not see. So I will not look on them with pity or spare them, but I will bring down on their own heads what they have done." Then the man in linen with the writing kit at his side brought back word saying, "I've done as you commanded." Okay. There's a lot there. I went through it quick. We're going to go through and just really understand what's happening here. So bear in mind, first of all, again, Ezekiel's physical body never leaves Jerusalem. Never leaves Babylon. He's in his house in Babylon. He has all these elders of Israel in front of him. He's sitting there and he's in some sort of dream state, whatever. He's in some sort of dream state where he's having a vision. So his body's here. But he then, the Spirit picks him up and takes him to Solomon's temple in Jerusalem and moves him around to a bunch of different places where he sees a bunch of different things. That's what's going on here in this vision. Okay, so in verse 1, Ezekiel's sitting in his house. The elders of Judah are in front of him. As I said, at this point, Ezekiel's been laying on his side for 430 days. Now, he doesn't lay on his side all day long, just most of the day. So apparently at this point, he's actually sitting up and talking to people. But he's still in that last 40 days. He's about 17 days into that. He's got about 23 days to go in that last 40 days when he's having this vision. So he's not quite ready yet. God hasn't quite finished preparing him for his prophecy yet. But God now gives him a second vision on this particular day, on September 17th, 592 BC. By this point, Ezekiel's been out there now for 400 days doing this weird stuff, laying on his side, making this diorama of the city of Jerusalem, showing the siege of Jerusalem. By this point, people know either he's crazy or he's a true prophet. And they're starting to sense now that he might be a true prophet. So the elders of Israel are sitting in front of him. And all of a sudden, he goes into this dream state. So now they know he's a true prophet, right? God is obviously speaking to him here. So presumably they're silent, waiting for him to finish his vision, and then he'll get back to them. By now they've seen something godly about Ezekiel. I mean, who's going to lay on their side for 430 days, in service to the Lord, unless they're a pretty godly person? Not many people are going to do that. So they're beginning to see something godly about him. They're beginning to see that he is a true prophet, and they're drawn to him. False prophets don't behave as Ezekiel's just behaved during this 430 days, right? They don't do the kind of stuff that Ezekiel's been doing. Remember, he shaved his head, he cooked specially, we ate specific meals at specific times. We went through all this last week, but that's what he was doing. So it's pretty obvious that there's something godly about Ezekiel. We don't know exactly how many of the Jewish elders had come to Babylon by this point. But by this point, at least some number of Jewish elders were here, and they were now in front of him. And these are the spiritual leaders of Israel, if you will. Most of these elders probably weren't very observant of God's laws anymore. Remember, Israel had really decayed over this period. Most of even the spiritual leaders of Israel weren't all that strong anymore. Some were, but most weren't. So chances are these guys weren't really strong in following the law. We don't know that for sure, but probably not. Chances are, if they were there, that they were asking him for prophecy. And guess what? He's about to give them one. Ezekiel is getting a prophecy from God right in front of them, right in his home, right in front of them. He's getting a prophecy from God. So Ezekiel presumably sits there for a while getting his prophecy, and then eventually he will answer them, and he will tell them exactly what he's seen and what he's heard. So that's what's happening here. And he says, the hand of the sovereign Lord was upon him. That's his way of saying, I'm receiving my vision, my prophecy. That's Ezekiel's way of saying that. So when you see those words in Ezekiel, and you'll see those several times as we go through Ezekiel, that means Ezekiel is receiving a prophecy at that moment. So that's what's happening here in this situation. Moving on to verse 2. He's in the prophecy. He's in the vision now. He looks up. He's in the vision. He sees what looks like a man. Notice it doesn't say it is a man. It's what looks like a man. So this is presumably a godly form, presumably a form of Jesus. It looks like a man. The man looks like the person. If you remember way back to chapter 1 of Ezekiel, another man visited him that looked the same way. It was laid out exactly the same way, and that turned out to be Jesus. Chances are this is the same person. It's very likely that it is. It's certainly the appearance is the same as what we saw in chapter 1. The appearance is also the same as what John sees of the same person in Revelation. So, presumably this is Jesus who is appearing to him in this vision. In verse 3, this person stretches out his hand to Ezekiel in the vision. Or actually it says something that looks like a hand. So it's something that looks like a hand is stretched out. So this isn't really a man. This is somebody that's kind of looking like a man to him. He doesn't know how else to describe it. I mean, how else do you describe a vision of a godly person other than in terms you understand? So he's describing him as though he were a man. He reaches out a hand, then he grabs Ezekiel by the hair of his head, lifts him up, and takes him by the Spirit. In other words, not physically takes him spiritually to Jerusalem. So now he's going to be in Jerusalem for the rest of these next several chapters. He's going to be in Jerusalem, and he's going to be specifically in Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple was still standing at this point. It was about to be torn down by the Babylonians, but at this point it was still standing. So he's going to be taken to Solomon's temple. So the Spirit takes him to the entrance to the north gate. This is north, east, south, west. Bear in mind the temple faces east, right? The temple faces east in Jerusalem. Solomon's temple faced east. The temple that Zerubbabel built later on faced east. The one that King Herod built faced east. The one that Ezekiel is telling us God will build eventually in the millennial kingdom will face east. So the temple always faces to the east. So the temple faces in this direction. He's on the north up here. Now, what happens in the north in Solomon's temple? Back in the days when Solomon's temple was being done properly, before they brought all these idols in and all these altars in, this was where the sacrifices were prepared. The animals were prepared for sacrifice. Then they were brought down and killed right here on the altar, and sacrificed on the altar in front of the holy place and in front of the Holy of Holies, which was where the Spirit of God was dwelling. So in the days of Solomon, or in the earlier days when this was truly being used properly, the sacrifices were brought in and down and into here to be killed. Okay, that's how they were brought in, was through this north entrance. So he is right up here now at this first X. This entrance, by the way, is fairly long in Solomon's temple. I think it's 40 feet long or something. It's quite long in Solomon's temple. It's actually like looking through a tunnel, kind of, if you will. Now, at the outer end of this temple, of this entrance, was an altar. And the altar was to a pagan god. So this wasn't something Solomon built. This was built later on. It was an altar to a pagan god, and the god was the goddess Asherah. Asherah, Asherah. And she was a Canaanite goddess. She was a false god, obviously. Her altar originally was put up by the evil king Manasseh. And Manasseh did that, if you wanted to look that up, in 2 Kings, I'm not going to read it to you, but 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 7, Manasseh built an altar to this evil god right here at the entrance to the north, right at the entrance to the north passageway coming in. Later on, God convinced Manasseh to take it down. He took it down in 2 Chronicles 33:15. So at that point, this altar was taken away. Now, we don't know how it got put back up, but somehow it got put back up again, presumably by Manasseh's son, who was also evil. Because later on we find in 2 Kings 23, verse 6, that the good king Josiah tears it down again. So he can't have torn it down again unless it was put back up by somebody. So presumably, when Manasseh died, presumably his son put the altar back up again, and then King Josiah took it down again. And now here we are, it's up again, right? So it's gone up and down, and now it's up again. And Josiah at this point has been dead for about 17 years. So sometime during that 17 years, and there were 4 evil kings in there, one of them put this altar back up again. So again, the evil kings are putting up altars to pagan gods in God's temple, in Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. Incredible to think about that. But that was happening back then. God was pretty upset about it, as we're going to see as we go through today's lesson. God is not happy that his temple is being used this way. Okay, so now in verse 4, the glory of God shows up again. Now the glory of God, remember, going all the way back to our second class, is you have these 4 cherubim, these 4 angels holding up the glory of God with their wings, and there's wheels underneath them, holding up the glory of God. And on top of that is a throne, and on top of that is the throne of a person who appears to be Jesus. The person with exactly the same description as what we see on the person that's here today. Did you have a question?
I'm a little confused, if you don't want me to interrupt.
No, feel free.
Now, here's Ezekiel in 592 BC in
Yes.
captivity in
Yes.
Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
The vision that he is seeing, is it present tense?
Yes.
Is there still this going on in Jerusalem?
Yes.
During the period of captivity?
Yes.
By evil kings and whatever?
Yes.
So this
Ezekiel was...
this vision theoretically is going on present tense.
It is present tense. Ezekiel was brought to Babylon in 597 BC, which was 5 years earlier than this. There were actually 3 phases in which the Jews were brought into captivity in Babylon. The first one in 605 BC was when Daniel got there. The second one in 597 BC was when Ezekiel got there. And in each of these, they brought a whole bunch of the leaders of Israel in as well. The third phase came in 586 BC when the temple was destroyed, when Solomon's temple's destroyed.
So it's between that period.
Yes, so we're between the second captivity and the third captivity now. A ton of Jews are already in Babylon at this point, including Daniel and Ezekiel. Jeremiah is still back in Jerusalem with the rest of the Jews that haven't left yet. So God is getting set within the next few years to destroy this temple and to kill a ton of Jews. And that's the story. God is now showing him what's about to happen. Okay? Thank you. Excellent question. Okay, so the glory of God is showing up again. And the glory of God, as I said, is these angels are holding it up. These cherubim, these angels are holding it up with their wings. And up there is Jesus on a throne above it. So he's seeing the glory of God again. This is actually I think the 5th time he's seen it now. He saw it in chapter 1. He saw it in a couple times in chapter 6 and 7, and maybe even in 5. So he's seeing it, I believe, now for the 5th time. And he's going to see it a lot more. All the way through chapter 11, the glory of God with the cherubim is going to be there constantly with him as he's going through this. Now, in verses 5 and 6, the person, the one who looks like a man, but who really isn't, it's really God, it's really Jesus, tells Ezekiel to look to the north. So Ezekiel standing here, he looks to the north, he sees Ashtoreth's altar, right? He looks to the north. Tells him to look to the north to see this evil idol. God is jealous of this idol. God is jealous whenever we worship anything that isn't him, right? If we're worshiping money, if we're worshiping power, if we're worshiping other gods, whatever, if we're not worshiping God, he is jealous of that. That's something you see all over the Bible. It's everywhere in the Bible. God gets jealous when we worship anybody but him. He wants all of our worship. That's the deal. Right? He wants us to worship him and him alone. So they're worshiping, they're sacrificing to this evil idol. God says in this verse that he no longer wishes to remain in this temple. So what we're going to see over the next several verses is God is going to depart from the temple in Jerusalem, from Solomon's temple, and he will depart just as the city is falling. That's going to happen a few years in the future. Again, a little bit future tense here, but it's going to happen in the future. God is going to depart from the temple. We're going to see the beginnings of that happening right here in these verses today. But eventually it will happen in chapter 11. Then God goes on to promise Ezekiel some additional detestable things. So now this person, Jesus, brings Ezekiel to the other end of the entrance to the temple. He brings him to right here. And at that point, he's to the altar area. He can see the altar now. This is God's altar here. This is the altar that sacrifices are made to God. The bronze altar, it's called in the Bible. And this person tells Ezekiel to dig into the wall. Pick this particular wall. Ezekiel starts digging, and he digs and he finds a doorway. He opens the door, and in here is a room with all these Jewish priests doing all these detestable sacrifices and prayers and stuff to idols. And the idols are like creepy crawling things, like scorpions and stuff in there, in here on the walls. So he walks in and sees all this detestable stuff going on inside that room. He sees images of all kinds of creepy crawly things. So this is symbolic of animal worship. Animal worship is one of the things that's going on. By the way, Asherah is symbolic of fertility worship. She was a goddess of fertility. So, we've now talked about fertility worship. Now we're looking at animal worship. We're going to see other kinds of worship as we go on. Now in verses 11 through 13, we see that in front of all these detestable things are standing the 70 elders of Israel. Israel had 70 elders at any point in time that were associated with the temple. So these are all in this room. There are 70 elders. These elders are sold out for the bad guys, right? They're sold out for the idols. These are not God's people anymore, and yet they're supposed to be God's people. They're supposed to be God's leaders among the people. But the elders, the spiritual elders of Israel, have sold out, and they're now deeply into all this idolatry stuff, and it's being done in God's temple by them, by the elders. God is just upset with this situation. Now, some of these elders may very well be some of the ones that are visiting here. Some of these guys may not be totally on God's side either. Some of the ones that are physically here with Ezekiel, we don't know that. But spiritually, they're all in this room. That's what he's saying. All 70 of them. And God tells Ezekiel these elders are doing detestable things, that they have their own little private shrines in their home that they worship idols at and stuff like that. They do it in the dark. They think God can't see them if it's in the dark. He can, right? And then he tells Ezekiel that he's going to see even more detestable things. So now in verses 14 and 15, he brings Ezekiel to the north gate of the temple, which is back up to here. And at that point, he tells Ezekiel that he's going to see women mourning for Tammuz. Tammuz is a Sumerian god or goddess, god of the underworld up here. So these people are worshiping death, right? Over here. There's another altar right up here, and these people are worshiping death. So there's a bunch of women up here mourning for this God up here because of he represents death, and they're mourning death. Tammuz, by the way, is mentioned in Isaiah 17:10 if you're looking to find another reference of Tammuz. So it's kind of a form of nature worship too, because it's a natural death. It says your life comes to an end and that's it. You're done. There's no spiritual dimension after that. That's what Tammuz was about. We see a lot of that today. How many people out there today believe there is no life after death? We see it in our world today. Verse 16, Ezekiel is now brought to the inner court of the temple. He's brought back to here again. He's brought back to here, right, to the inner court, right, the place between the holy place and the altar. He's brought right to the holiest place you can get to unless you're a priest, the holiest place you can get to in the temple. At that point, he sees 25 elders. I only put 3 of them here, but they're all here lined up in front of the altar. The priests are only supposed to ever face the altar. When they're walking away, they walk away facing the altar, right? Pardon me. They're always supposed to face the altar, but these priests aren't facing the altar. They're facing east. They're facing toward Babylon, right? Babylon is to the east. They're facing east. So these people are facing in the direction of paganism. Not only are they facing that way, they're worshiping that way. It goes on to say that they are worshiping. They're doing idol worship right there, in that direction. So these are other elders of Israel that are facing east and doing idol worship. They're looking right past God's altar and facing to the east and worshiping the idols there. In verses 17 and 18, this person asks Ezekiel if these elders consider all this evil idol worship to just be some trivial thing. Do these guys think this is no big deal, right? Is that what God's asking him? And Ezekiel doesn't know what to do. He says that these people, God says these people are filling the land with violence. So not only are they worshiping false gods, but there's a lot of violence going on. People are killing each other, lots of violence going on out there, which is typical when people lose sight of God. Violence rises in a society. We see that in our society today, right? When people lose sight of God, violence rises. These people are constantly provoking the Lord to anger. God has now decided he's going to deal with them. He's going to deal with them in his anger. He's no longer going to have any pity on them. He will not spare them. Even though these are his chosen people, he is done with these people that are doing this idol worship thing. He's done with them. He's given them enough time to repent. The ones that haven't, he is done with. And he's not going to listen to them anymore, no matter how loud they wail when the city is falling, and it's going to fall in a few years. No matter how loud they wail, he is not going to listen. He will turn a deaf ear to them. This is the punishment that God is announcing here in verse 18. Now moving on to chapter 9. In chapter 9, God opens up in verses 1 and 2, showing Ezekiel how he plans to kill these idol worshipers. Now again, this is a spiritual thing that he's showing him. The physical thing is going to be done by the Babylonians with swords, right? The Babylonians are going to break into the city with swords and start killing people. That's physically how it's really going to happen. But God is setting it up behind the scenes with 7 people, or 7 angels, if you will, that he is giving the power to kill all these people in Jerusalem. And we're going to see the story of that here in chapter 9. Remember, to us, it looks like the Babylonians are the ones that are besieging the city, because physically that's what happened, but spiritually, these 7 people are the ones who are besieging the city. And that's what he's seeing in this vision. He's seeing these 7 people. They're apparently angels. The 6 of them are called guards of the city, and they are people who carry weapons. They are guards of the city. They're guarding the city for God. They come from the direction of the upper gate. So these people come in from this direction into the inner court to here. They come from someplace up here, we don't know where. They come in through this north gate, and they stand here for the first scene, and then later on they're going to be out here for the second scene. So right now they're here at this point. And that's the direction, just to bear in mind that where they're coming from is the direction where people are worshiping Asherah and Tammuz. So they're coming from the places of the worst idol worship through this passage and over to here. Now, these are executioners, by the way. These are people with weapons, and God is choosing them to be his executioners. These are not people, I'm sorry, these are angels. God is choosing them to be his executioners. There's a seventh person who's going to come with them. This person's in charge of the other six. And we're going to see some things about that person in just a minute, but just so you know, there's a seventh person who comes in with them. They all stand, all seven of them, by the altar, right here, awaiting instructions from God. Now, next thing we see is the glory of the God of Israel again. So here again is the cherubim with Jesus on the throne, the glory of the God of Israel, which we've seen all through these first 8 chapters, or 9 chapters now, or 9 chapters. We've seen it constantly, and we're going to see it all the way through chapter 11. The glory of Israel is still here in the temple. It will leave eventually, but it's still here. The Lord calls out to the seventh man, who, by the way, is dressed in white linen. And it says man, but he's really an angel. And he has a writing kit by his side, so he has the ability to write something down. It's kind of like the Lamb's Book of Life, right? He's going to determine who gets saved in Jerusalem. That's what's about to happen here. This man will determine who gets saved, and the ones who don't, and that's this person. And the one who doesn't get saved, the other 6 people are going to kill them. That's what's going to happen. Now again, physically the Babylonians will do the killing, but God is really planning this behind the scenes. Now in verse 4, God tells the 7th executioner, which is the man dressed in white, to go with the men throughout the city of Jerusalem, and he and the men are to put a mark on the foreheads of those people who are grieving and lamenting over the evil things that are being done in the temple. So anybody in Jerusalem who is looking at all this idolatry and saying, this is terrible, God, please save us, those people are going to get a mark on their forehead. This man's going to put it there. I don't know if it's a physical mark, but they're going to get a mark on their forehead. This person is going to put it there, and the 6 executioners will then spare that person. So what's going to happen is these 6 executioners are going to go throughout Jerusalem, and this will happen on the day Jerusalem falls, 5 years later. The 6 executioners will go throughout Jerusalem, and anybody with the mark on his forehead will be saved. All the ones who don't, and they will get to go to Babylon. Anyone who doesn't have the mark on his forehead is going to die on that day. So this is how God is setting this all up. Now, you may think this sounds pretty familiar, and it does. We've seen this 3 other places in the Bible. In Revelation 14:1, God talks about the 144 Jewish converts, evangelists, who are going to receive the mark of Christ on their foreheads. And let me read that to you. This is Revelation 14:1. This is John speaking. Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb, Jesus, standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads, okay? So the 144,000 received the mark of Christ on their foreheads when they were named by Christ to be his evangelists. So we know that from there. The second time we see this is a little bit earlier in Revelation 13:16. We see the reverse of it. This is the scene where the false prophet of the Antichrist begins to mark people for the Antichrist with the mark of the Antichrist. This is Revelation 13:16. He, that would be the false prophet, also forced everyone, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had that mark. So you had to be marked with the mark of Satan, or else you couldn't buy and sell things. You couldn't get food, right? This was during the tribulation period. Now, the third time in Scripture we see something like this is during the Passover scene in Exodus 12:7. And this is the scene where the angel of death is passing over, or is coming into the Egyptian areas of the country, and is killing the firstborns. And the Jews are told to take a lamb's blood and paint it over the transom of their doorway. And so it says, then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses. And once they have that, God promises, he goes on and takes several more verses I'm not going to get into here, but God promises that death will pass over them. So again, we see God marking people to be saved, or Satan marking people to die spiritually. Moving on to verse 5 through 7. These other 6 people are, as I said, are executioners of God. They are now going to receive their marching orders from God. Their marching orders tell them to go throughout the city and kill anybody who doesn't have this mark on his forehead. So if the guy in the white linen didn't put a mark on their forehead, these 6 executioners are to kill them. And again, this is a spiritual look at this. The physical thing is being done by the Babylonians with swords. But this is a spiritual thing, the way God is looking at it. They're kill them without mercy, without compassion. Just kill them. They're just to slaughter them. And that is what the Babylonians did. They just slaughtered the Jews when they took the city. They just absolutely slaughtered them. They slaughter young men, old men, maidens, women, even children. They must kill everyone who doesn't have God's mark on their forehead. And the place there to start is right here with these guys that are standing in front of the altar and looking the wrong way and worshiping the wrong gods, right? And then they're to go up here to these guys up here. They're to kill everyone, first of all, in the temple. God says, go ahead and shed blood in the temple. The Bible says you can never shed blood in the temple. God is authorizing it here. He's authorizing the Babylonians to come in and kill these evil priests. And these evil people up here that are doing all this stuff, God is authorizing that bloodshed to occur right there in his temple. So God says to start with them and then go throughout the city and kill. So Ezekiel's looking at this and he hears this and he reacts. He's thinking, these are my people, the Jews, are about to be killed in my city. Now, Ezekiel's physically in Babylon, but spiritually, again, he's here. So Ezekiel reacts to this. He falls on his face. He just sees God's incredible outpouring of wrath against his people. And he cries out to God. He asks God if God's going to destroy all the Jews. And God answers him in verses 9 through 10. God explains that the sins of Israel and Judah are exceedingly great. This has been going on a long time. Okay, these are people worshiping idols in God's temple. His own priests, God's own priests, worshiping idols in God's temple. This is just awful stuff going on here. And it's been going on for hundreds of years. A very long time this has been going on. Israel is full of bloodshed at this point, God says. It's full of injustice. It's full of people violating God's laws. So he's kind of justifying to Ezekiel why this is going to happen, right? This is justified anger. It goes on to say, people are going to accuse the Lord of forsaking the land of Israel and the people of Israel. And they're going to accuse God of not seeing his people. And God assures Israel that he will not look on them with any pity. If they do not have this mark on them, God will not look on them with any pity during this period that's about to come. When Jerusalem falls, God will not have any pity on these people. They've had hundreds of years to do this. They've continued to do it. He can't get them to repent. He's done with them. So this is a full punishment, a deserved punishment for everything sinful that they've done. This is, we always think of God as this loving, wonderful, merciful God, but there's a side of God that eventually will run out of patience with us if we don't accept him. And we're seeing that there. Eventually we'll see that in our world. Not today, maybe not today, but eventually we'll see that in our world. God eventually will run out of patience with us if we choose evil, choose sin, and don't repent and don't turn to him. Finally, in verse 11, the man in the white linen comes back. This is the guy who's in charge of the executioners. And he says, I have done as you commanded. So This is now looking into the future, going to the question of when this is happening. This part will happen 6 years later, 5 years later, when Jerusalem actually falls. These people will have done what God has commanded during that period. So that's where we are today. Now next week we're going to continue on we're going to see next week that it will begin to focus more and more and more on the glory of God, and we're going to see the glory of God begin to leave the temple. And it will happen in stages. We'll see it happen. The glory of God right now is back here in the Holy of Holies, but we will begin to see it move out, even out to the entrance to the temple here, eventually out to the Mount of Olives, which is to the east of the city, as God departs from Jerusalem, as God just says, goodbye, I'm leaving. God will be leaving during this period. So the glory of God is going to depart from Jerusalem. We're going to see that next week and in the following week as we go through chapters 10 and 11. And then after chapter 11, the glory of God will be out of Jerusalem. And at that point, the destruction of Jerusalem will be ready to begin. So, questions?
So when the third deportation, third part of the captivity, there were people who were safely transported to Babylon. How were they, were they the ones that God selected, and how would that have happened? Because the Babylonians had no way of knowing the difference when they slaughtered all these people.
Jeremiah told them, we're not studying Jeremiah in this class, but Jeremiah told them to go to the Babylonians and surrender and say, take me into captivity. He told them to go ahead and go into captivity. Those people who did that, who surrendered to the Babylonians and said, I want to go into captivity, the Babylonians put them in chains and took them to Babylon. Now, when they got to Babylon, it was really pretty good. They took the chains off. They weren't treated as slaves. They actually gave them their own city. They gave them fresh water. They gave them the right to own their own homes, to open their own businesses. They gave them the right to worship God. They gave them a lot of freedom. So the people who chose to go to Babylon thought they were going into slavery, but they really were the ones who were being saved. They were really the remnant of Israel. And they got there in 3 pieces. But the third piece was the people who, in 586 BC, when the Babylonians were destroying the city, voluntarily allowed themselves to go into captivity. The ones who fought the Babylonians died. The ones who tried to run away were slain. They were cut down with the sword. A lot of the people that were in the city and in some of the outlying areas died of famine and disease because there was no food. So all the people who didn't voluntarily go into exile to Babylon at that time died. And the ones who did fine. Babylon, by the time the Jews finally left exile 100 years or 70 years later, there was over 1 million men. So there's probably 2 million people in Babylon, Jews in Babylon. That's a lot of Jews in Babylon. That's a massive number of Jews that were in Babylon at that time. So they thrived in Babylon because God was blessing them if they went. So, okay, other questions? Okay, I'm getting the hook back there. So, yeah, thank you. And folks at home, thank you for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week. And if you have any questions or need copies of the notes, then you can either download them from Facebook or you can call the church and we'll send you copies of the notes. Thank you.